Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Aniszcyzk. I have the fun job of being CTO of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. I helped found the Cloud Native Computing Foundation a little over 6 years ago. We started to build a home for Kubernetes and a variety of other open source cloud native projects. I'm happy to be here today to talk to you a little bit about the future of cloud native in the upcoming years and talk a little bit about some future predictions of where we see the cloud native ecosystem going. So, first off, before I kind of get started, I want to congratulate the NIA. You've been a member since 2020 in CNCF, and I'm, very thankful for your support. I also want to personally congratulate you on your recent release of the Pasta and your migration to Kubernetes. I heard that was a bit of a challenge and adventure, and it's been working out pretty well. So I'm very happy to hear organizations when they migrate to Cloud Native and Kubernetes. So congratulations, and thank you again for your support. We truly appreciate it. For those of you who aren't aware, I've mentioned this earlier. CNCF, we've existed, for a little over 6 years now. Our ecosystem has grown to over 120 open source projects. We started with Kubernetes as our first project, but we have projects such as Containerd, which is the old Docker engine, to things like Envoy, which is a reverse proxy, service proxy, to logging technology such as Fluentd, to distributed databases such as Vitess. So we truly have a wide variety of projects that we support in our community to ensure that organizations like yourself are able to innovate and build upon them to build interesting solutions for your end users and unique needs. We have an ecosystem of over 700 members, from AWS to Apple to VMware to Zendesk. We have basically almost every major hyperscaler cloud out there is a member organization that supports this mission of bringing cloud native open source technology to the world. We're very happy to have NIA involved in this ecosystem, bringing unique viewpoints to us. So what's currently the state of cloud native? So, every, year or so, we put together a report that shows how many developers out there are using Kubernetes, how many people are, essentially learning about the technology. And so we haven't released this officially yet. It'll be coming out in a couple of weeks from today, but I'll share you with our latest results. So we've noticed that since 2020, which was the kind of last report we've done here, there's over 5.6 million people using Kubernetes worldwide, which is a 67% increase over 1 year. We've also noticed that there's 6.8 cloud native developers, 60 million cloud native developers worldwide, which is, up more than 2 million from a couple years ago, roughly. So we're seeing a lot more people using and getting familiar with Kubernetes technology, and we're seeing a more increased adoption of containerization technology. This is just from our survey, but almost every survey out there you look at, you're seeing this kind of constant trend of further adoption of cloud native technology and projects. Some other kind of fun things to share is, I always like looking at the data and kind of see, how does open source impact an ecosystem? And so we have this interesting report that we put together called Open Source Velocities. If you go to GitHub, github.com/CNCF/velocity, you could see some of these. But one interesting thing, if you look at the early data from when the Kubernetes project was started, Google, the progenitor of the project, was doing about 80% of the work. What happened over time is you could see from the graph on the left is other companies, such as your Red Hats of the world, Microsoft's, Huawei, VMware, and so on, came together and actually contributed to the project. And Google's contribution pie went down to less than a quarter, even though if you look at the graph on the right, Google's never slowed down their contributions. They've actually increased them over time. It's just that the pie has grown overall in terms of companies contributing and improving Kubernetes to benefit themselves and the overall ecosystem, that you essentially have grown the pie of open source contribution to everyone, and everyone is benefiting. To me, this is just a fundamental, great example of what happens when you open source a project and build a great community around it and have people help and improve things so that they're doing all this other work on top of what you've been doing. Google would have never been able to do this on their own, and they're a very large successful company. So just a great kind of case study, and the power of an organization like CNCF out there to kind of push forward, this open source, technique and collaboration out there. So, I was asked to talk a little bit about, what's going to happen, next, year or so in cloud native, where things are going. So I'll kind of share a couple trends, that we're seeing across the ecosystem before wrapping up with some final thoughts, for all y'all. So, as you are, we've been going through incredible pandemic the last couple of years. If you look at the survey data out there, and you've talked to companies, I have the unique privilege of speaking with many organizations worldwide, and the pandemic has essentially accelerated people's adoption of cloud or migration to more cloud native techniques. If you look at, for example, there's this report called the State of the Cloud report that's put together by Flexera. Almost everyone is predicting to increase their cloud spend in the next year or so. And it's just it's just what's happened. It's like the fact that we've all had to work remotely, and distributed way. It's kind of forced the digital transformation of a lot of organizations that may have been delaying it, whether they've been banks, insurance companies, or governmental bodies. The pandemic has kind of helped with that. And, we essentially have seen this shift within CNCF. Our contributions have gone up, our interest in projects have gone up. So this is something that we're thinking is going to continue to trend. Any organizations that were basically holding out from moving to the cloud or adopting cloud native techniques are going to move forward, quickly, and we predict that this is going to continue to accelerate in the coming years. Another thing that we've noticed is there's been a lot of innovation in terms of companies being acquired. If you look all over the ecosystem, you have companies constantly being acquired by larger companies. So we see that cloud native innovation is not going to slow down. There's going to be companies out there that are doing unique things, and larger companies essentially acquire them and so on. So we believe that this innovation and cycle of startup to organization to acquisition will continue and accelerate in the coming years. Another interesting thing that we're seeing more and more in CNCF is this notion of FinOps, and a desire to learn and care about FinOps, and cloud financial management is another word for this. So what's essentially happening is, as companies migrate to the cloud, it's great. You have basically a flexible resources that you could kind of rent and use at any time. If you don't have a culture in place to track the usage of your cloud resources, track any inefficiencies, you lead into some troubles where you may have a larger bill than you expect, or you don't know why certain services are being used. So there's this new kind of effort called FinOps, which is basically trying to, define a culture and build a set of specifications and tools to help truly capture some of this usage and acceleration of cloud usage all throughout there. There's a variety of techniques out there. If you've heard things of such as showback and chargeback that you could implement in your teams to ensure better usage of cloud resources, but this stuff is difficult. So one thing I recommend that your organization looks at is look at something called the FinOps Foundation out there, and FinOps practices in general. There's a lot of great folks sharing practices and trying to figure out how we could better do this, because the better FinOps practices you have, the more efficient uses of resources you have, and overall it's even just better for the environment. Let's truly try to optimize the usage of our cloud-based resources if we can. Another big trend that is happening, I've been involved in Linux for quite a while, especially earlier in my career. What we're noticing is people are taking Kubernetes and starting to optimize it in a variety of different environments. So for example, we have people putting Kubernetes now in Raspberry Pis, in edge-based environments, and like radio access networks and so on. We have a variety of stripped down lightweight Kubernetes distributions. We have things like K3s, K0s, KubeEdge, which is a kind of a unique take, virtual kubelet, all kind of different ways of stretching the Kubernetes cloud native, basically abstractions to get it to work in another environment. You're going to see this happen faster and faster. We're seeing a lot more telecommunications companies, retailers, all finding unique ways of using Kubernetes in non-traditional, cloud-based, environments. So I predict that Kubernetes will follow a very traditional path, just like Linux did, where, maybe it started in servers. Eventually, someone put Linux on phones, and we have Androids and all these things, TVs. We have Tizen and Samsung. So, you know, Kubernetes is going to go through this same evolution, because it is a very useful piece of software that people want to take advantage of all the tools and the ecosystem that has been built around Kubernetes and apply that to those new and distributed, maybe more constrained environments. Um, Other things that we're seeing, especially in North America at least, is there's this notion of what we call in CNCF end user open source innovation. So historically, a lot of open source has come from environments where they come from vendors, right? Well, what's happened is a lot of innovation now is coming from end users. So we have projects in CNCF like Envoy from Lyft, Cloud Custodian from Capital One, all these kind of different technologies out there that are born from end user companies. If you kind of look at the data, more and more organizations are getting comfortable with sharing some unique solutions that they've kind of come up with on their own. So we predict that this is going to continue to be a huge trend moving forward. Another interesting thing to look at is multi-cloud. So a lot of organizations out there are using multiple clouds. This is nothing to essentially should not be a surprise to anyone. You're a large organization, you acquire a lot of companies, and all of a sudden you're using a variety of different clouds. What we're seeing is the Kubernetes API essentially is being used as that uh, potential cross-cloud API to access resources in a very similar way, kind of similar to potentially you could use something like Terraform to provision cloud resources. Well, there are projects out there like Crossplane from CNCF that basically allow you to build and provision something like an S3 object store in a unique way that essentially you could use across different clouds through a Kubernetes CRD. So this is some kind of trend that I would look at and potentially look at experimenting internally. Kubernetes kind of provides finally that almost like POSIX style substrate that is required to truly have a cross cloud enabled environment. Another thing to look at is next generation IDEs. I spent a big portion of my career working on developer tools through things like Eclipse IDE. Um, you know, Imagine a world where we could have cloud-based provisioned IDs. If you go to GitHub, for example, now, and you click a dot on any GitHub repo, it'll spin up a simple VS Code editor, so you could actually go edit what's in that repo. GitHub also has something called code spaces. There's also companies out there such as Gitpod or Replit that essentially allow you to do cloud-based provisioning of environments. This type of tool where you could basically provision an environment that's fully ready, everything's good to go, I think will be the future of our next generation of development environments experiences. So I encourage everyone here to look at, how companies and organizations are doing this essentially for their teams. I'm hearing more and more, even more, you know, essentially innovative companies in their environments that such as Shopify that are essentially using cloud-based IDs. Facebook also is very famous, for doing this. So I encourage you to kind of look, here and see what you could find. So some final thoughts as I kind of wrap, things up. You know, if you kind of look at the top contributors to CNCF projects, obviously of the United States, it's we're started as a U.S. foundation, right? You have Germany, China, and a bunch of other countries, and Korea comes up, I think number 16, 17, which is great. It's a good number overall given all the countries out there, but I think you have to remember that you know contribution is truly the currency of open source. If you want to be successful in open source and influence a project, you have to contribute and have some formal role in that organization. If you actually look at research out there, for example, from Harvard, there are studies that show that the more people that essentially produce and contribute to open source projects, they actually capture more productive value out of that open source software than their free riding peers. So, my lesson to you and essentially call to action is contribute more to projects, up this number. So maybe next time we have a conversation, you're maybe a top 10 contributor because you are actually going to benefit it from it from your organization level. Like there's actual concrete benefit based on research out there. So please remember that contribution that's currency open source, and you get value out of that too for your organization. It's not just a charitable thing; it's actually good for business. Finally, grow with the community. We have a fantastic CNCF community out there. We have ambassador programs. We're hosting a European event out in Spain next year in Europe in May 2022. We'd love to see you there. We have local Kubernetes community days all over the world. For example, we did the KCD Korea on September 19th. A few months ago. We'd love to see more of those done. We have speaker bureaus if you need to find speakers. So please look at our community and join the community, host a KCD, apply to be a mentor, apply to ambassador. We would love to have you as part of our community. Finally, thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to everyone today. It's sad that I cannot be there in person and congratulate you on your successful migration to Kubernetes in the Pasta platform. Final thoughts is can't wait to kind of do this in person and hopefully meet some of you at our Kubernetes conferences throughout the world. Anytime you successfully migrate a platform to a new technology and do it without affecting end users too much is something truly to be proud of. And I think all of you should congratulate yourself on that kind of journey. So thank you very much. I hope you learned something new today, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to meet each other physically at one of the KubeCons we host throughout the world. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you another time. Enjoy the rest of your event.